we each only have 24 hours in our days, right? So when the Kitces report was talking about how 83% of the cost of acquiring a new client is actually time that your high value advisor is spending, your high value staff is spending, actually going out and trying to get in front of that prospect, trying to start that conversation with them. That is inherently limited by the 24 hours they have in their days. What we're doing is we are taking the sales function, the sales process, and as much as we can, we are packaging up the selling messages that we use into media, and we are multiplying their impact, multiplying their distribution by putting that media out into the world. The transformation here is that when you have the marketing costs, the hard costs of marketing and advertising, doing most of the heavy lifting of prospecting and lead generation for you, the leads and prospects that are speaking to an advisor, that are taking that advisor's time, are much closer to that point where they're ready to sign a client agreement. They're much closer to that point where they are ready to become a client. Welcome to Daily Discovery Calls for Financial Advisors, the first and only show dedicated exclusively to helping entrepreneurial, growth-driven financial advisors book more discovery calls with qualified prospects every day of the week. I'm your host, Roy Furr, the Advisor CMO. Let's get into it. And we are back with the next episode of Daily Discovery Calls for Financial Advisors, the first and only podcast dedicated exclusively to helping financial advisors and RIAs put more discovery calls on your calendar every single day. I'm Roy Furr, the Advisor CMO. Today's episode, we're talking about what every financial advisor should know about leverage. And you probably think that you understand leverage, at least from a financial perspective, and you're probably right. But we're going to look at it in a different way today, and I think it's going to be eye-opening for you. So in this episode, we're going to talk about the truth about leverage many financial advisors miss, how much you're really spending to acquire new clients, and how a leverage mindset shift could triple your new client flow. With that, let's dive into some shocking numbers that reveal what financial advisors don't know about leverage. So like I said, you think you know about leverage, and you do from a financial perspective. So, for example, making your money work for you after you've worked for some money is a great way to leverage the power of that income that you earn throughout your life. That's a great way that financial advisors help people with leverage every day. But according to the Kitces report, and this is going to be relevant, you're going to see the relevance here very soon. According to the Kitces report, the average cost to acquire one new financial client was $3,119, of which 83% or $2,600 was the time cost of the financial advisor. Only $519 in actual dollars was spent on marketing costs. Now that number is a little bit old. The actual total average cost to acquire a new financial client has gone up since then. But the ratio, as far as I understand, is still the same. And this was the clearest quote that I could provide. So we have 83% going into time cost and $519, which is the 17% left over, going into the marketing costs. So there is a huge amount of marketing costs that is kind of hidden from your P&L statement in marketing if you don't specifically carve it out. And that is the amount of time that advisors are spending day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, trying to do lead generation, trying to attract new clients into the business. And when we talk about time costs, this is mostly one-to-one or small group presentations, prospecting, networking, lead generation, researching potential prospects for the business. This kind of very, very labor-intensive effort that advisors are putting in to go out and attract new clients into the business. When we look at marketing costs, marketing is ideally, at least, if you're doing it right, it is paying to generate appointments. Now, there can be some touch points before the person is actually requesting an appointment. But a good marketing program, the ultimate goal of that marketing program and the ultimate destination of every lead that keeps engaging needs to be generating a appointment request. That lead, that potential client, that prospect needs to be requesting an appointment with an advisor. And this is the real leverage for business growth because it takes the time and effort out of it for your high value, high paid advisors. And it gets it to the point where your high value, high paid advisors are primarily spending time with leads and prospects once they're already eager to move forward. And it's not saying every lead is going to convert, every prospect is going to convert. I don't want to promise that. But the transformation here is that when you have the marketing costs, the hard costs of marketing and advertising, doing most of the heavy lifting of prospecting and lead generation for you, the leads and prospects that are speaking to an advisor, that are taking that advisor's time, are much closer to that point where they're ready to sign a client agreement. They're much closer to that point where they are ready to become a client. So we're going to talk a lot about that as a form of leverage today. Here's one simple form of leverage to apply now, and that's a better marketing message. Now, you may be familiar with Jay Abraham. His book, Getting Everything You Can Out of All You've Got, is a classic on marketing. And Jay said, as an example, we've changed a headline in an ad and quadrupled or 10 times the response from the same amount of expenditure, same access to the same media. Changing the headline quadrupled to 10 times the response. We've changed a price point and we've increased our results 50%, 60%. We've changed the proposition in the proposal in the ad and we've doubled the yield. Basically, when you present yourself in a different way, a more effective way, what you find is that your marketing or advertising generates more response. Now, that is leveraging, again, in Jay's language, the same amount of expenditure, same access to the same media. You're generating more results from the same expense, from the same time. So if you want to make your discovery calls more desirable, which is an example of changing the proposition in the proposal in the ad, I have a proven process here for financial advisors. I call it desirable discovery calls. And I actually put together a 12-minute training video. So what if every time that you talked about a discovery call, you made it more likely? Maybe it's double, maybe it's more than that, maybe it's less than that, I don't know. But what if you made it much more likely that the person that you're talking to about booking a discovery call, either through marketing, through advertising, or just through conversation, would actually book that call with you? Well, that's what this free 12-minute training video is designed to do. It's at TheAdvisorCMO.com/discovery. Again, that's TheAdvisorCMO.com/discovery. There's a link in the description. And that shows you how to create desirable discovery calls that make your prospects more interested in actually booking that call with you and having that first conversation, booking that, requesting that appointment. And so that is one form of marketing leverage, one example of marketing leverage. But let me rewind a little bit here. We each only have 24 hours in our days, right? So when the Kitces report was talking about how 83% of the cost of acquiring a new client is actually time that your high value advisor is spending, your high value staff is spending, actually going out and trying to get in front of that prospect, trying to start that conversation with them. That is inherently limited by the 24 hours they have in their days, by, I don't know, we'll just say 40 hours that they have in their work week, right? And so when we break that down, if we make an assumption that that advisor is being paid $200 per hour. Now, if you're the founder of the firm, if you are a lead advisor, a senior advisor, maybe your number per hour is much higher than this. Other people in your firm, maybe it's much lower, but I just threw it out there. $200 an hour as an average, $2,600 time cost. That means they're spending 13 hours on average per new client they're bringing in the door, which means you're looking at a maximum of 3 to 4 clients per week. 4 clients per week would be overtime if you're doing no servicing. If you're not doing any servicing at all and your job is just to be a producing advisor, you are maxing out at about 3 to 4 clients per week if you're spending 13 hours per client to bring those clients in the door. Now, the question I have for you is how much time of that is actually spent in client conversion and onboarding versus the time spent doing prospecting and lead generation? My guess is that when we actually look at the amount of time that a producing advisor spends with a person that converts to becoming a client, it's probably 2 to 4 hours that they're actually spending in the conversion and initial onboarding step before it transforms into an actual like client onboarding, right? The sales conversion part of that is what we're looking at measuring when we're looking at how much does it cost to acquire a client. That sales conversion part of it is probably only 2 to 4 hours out of that 13 hours, which means that we're looking at 9 to 11 hours that's spent doing all the other stuff that would fall more under prospecting and lead generation, trying to generate demand for your services as a financial advisor. And so there is a lot of time there. The 2 to 4 hours becomes mostly non-negotiable as human time. Now, I would argue that we could probably even cut that down to 1 to 2 hours because I've seen financial advisory firms that do that in terms of the actual time spent with an advisor that is sales conversion, as opposed to any kind of service delivery, that is sales conversion, cut down to as little as 1 to 2 hours because they've just done such a good job of making sure that by the time that person is having that conversation with the advisor, that person is like fully pre-educated, pre-qualified, pre-motivated to become a client of that firm. And because they're already at that point when they are speaking with an advisor, then, hey, it doesn't take much to say, all right, let's make sure that you're a good fit here. And here's what it's going to look like to work with us. And here's what it takes to get started. Let's do that. And that can be a fairly simple conversation if you're marketing and advertising, if all those messages that you're putting out through media do most of the heavy lifting, right? Versus spending 13 hours to go out, to find, to prospect, to generate the lead, to try and initiate the conversations, to deal with all the rejection of all the people who are not going to become clients, which that's a large part of this average per client here. You may spend 2-3 hours per client for the ones that do become clients, where you just find that person at that right point in time with the right need and the right desire, and like they're just ready, right? When you happen on a hot prospect, that may only take a couple hours, right? But all that time dealing with prospects that don't want to talk to you, that don't want to give you the time of day, of dealing with cold calling and rejection and hang up, and dealing with sending out emails that never get answered, and all the things that you might be doing for the people who aren't going to become clients and don't really want to talk to you, and all the emotional baggage that comes along with spending so many of hours of your week doing that, right? That's where a lot of the average 13 hours per client is, okay? So what if, I kind of spoke to this already. What if the time spent in conversion and onboarding, the actual process that we would attribute to the client acquisition part of this, could drop to 2 to 4 hours per client? Then we could go from that 3 to 4 new clients per week to maybe 6 to 8 new clients per week, and have much more time for client service, right? A 3 to 4 is kind of an unrealistic expectation for anybody to handle if they're actually also servicing clients. 3 to 4, like one new client per week, if you're also servicing clients, is probably what you can afford to spend 13 hours doing prospecting, right? Maybe two. Spend half your week, a little more than half your week prospecting, and a little less than half your week doing all the kind of servicing, right? But what if we could bump that up to a single advisor being able to handle 6 to 8 new clients per week and have even more time left over in their week for client servicing, because the marketing, the advertising, all that messaging that's going out, automated communication, is doing more of the heavy lifting of this prospecting, of this lead generation, and even of what leads to that person converting and becoming a client. So the secret here goes back to a book that was published, I think it's 1923. I'm not remembering. I know it was in the 1920s, called Scientific Advertising by Claude Hopkins. And actually goes back even before that to his colleague, John E. Kennedy, who wrote a book called Reason Why Advertising. And John E. Kennedy brought to the Lord and Thomas ad agency that Claude Hopkins also worked at this concept of advertising, the definition of advertising being salesmanship in print. Now, very specifically, he said salesmanship in print because, well, number one, most salespeople at the time were men. That's just how the world was in the 1920s and before that. And number two, in print, because that was the primary advertising medium at the time. So my updated language for that is sales multiplied marketing and advertising. So what we're doing is we are taking the sales function, the sales process, and as much as we can, we are packaging up the selling messages that we use into media, and we are multiplying their impact, multiplying their distribution by putting that media out into the world. And there are lots of ways that we can do that. There are almost infinite ways, it feels like today, that you can do that. You have video as a medium. You have audio as a medium. You have text as a medium. You have online media. You have offline media. You have all these different ways that you can put your selling message into media that is doing work even when the salesperson does not have to. And you can especially replace things like manual prospecting and very repetitive communication. If you're saying the same thing to every new potential client in every first appointment that you have with them, what if you were to take that repetitive communication that you put in that first appointment every single time that explains what it's like to work with the firm, what you should expect, what we expect from you, all of that, and you put that into a welcome video so that the moment someone said, "Hey, I want to meet with your firm," they're getting that message delivered prior to the meeting, and they are expected to watch that message prior to the meeting. They have that video that they engage with, and they have that message that has been delivered prior to that first appointment. Well, when I talked about advisory firms that are dropping down their conversion process from maybe 3 to 4 hours down to 1 to 2 hours, the reason why is because they have a marketing asset like that is delivering the message prior to the first meeting, and it is leading to more and more appointments being converted in the first meeting versus having to wait for it. And a large part of this, especially in financial services, is education-based marketing. You don't have to be some slimy sales closer to do it this way. You just have to educate people. Here's the problems. Here's the challenges that most people or many people face with their money, with their financial planning, with these individual aspects of financial planning, with taxes, with Social Security, with estate planning, with investments, with retirement income planning, with all of these different things. Here's all these problems and challenges that people face. Here's what our perspective is on the best ways to solve those problems, those challenges. And here's how we've built that into our system. And here's what it looks like for clients who come to work with us, right? And so we're educating people and we're just giving people a next step, right? And by doing that in media, instead of doing that in manual prospecting or one-on-one appointments, what's happening is that people are consuming this at their own pace, on their own time. And then by giving them the opportunity to raise their hand once they've consumed enough, once they feel educated enough, then you're moving them to the actual one-on-one communication that takes the time of your advisors. That moment where they feel like, yeah, it makes sense to move forward. And it is very different. It can really significantly shrink the amount of time that the advisor is going to spend on what might be called marketing or client acquisition activities. And because it's dramatically reducing the amount of time spent on that, it's dramatically reducing the time cost or soft costs associated with that. So here's some math to think about. So if the current numbers are $2,600 time costs plus $519 marketing costs, leading to $3,119 total costs, you might think, yeah, but I don't have budget for marketing. Well, the shift here is, what if we drop down instead of 13 hours, $200 an hour, $2,600 time cost? What if we drop that down to 4 hours of time cost? So for the average new client coming in, the advisor is only spending 4 hours in total time cost to acquire that client. And we shift 100% of that savings over to marketing costs. $2,319 now goes to marketing costs, to investing in media, to investing in media distribution, to investing in whatever it is that we need to invest in on a per client basis to really educate, motivate, and convert that person into a lead where they're basically showing up to the advisor ready to have that conversation about, what does it take for me to become a client now? Well, still our total marketing cost is $3,119, right? I did this math so that the marketing cost would come out the same. Well, we're spending the same amount of money, so why do we do that? Well, if we said, initially I said that an advisor spending 13 hours per client to acquire that client is going to spend, could acquire 3 to 4 clients per week. And that's true if they're just a producing advisor. But the reality is they might be time constrained down to about 1 new client per week if they're spending so much time, if they're spending 13 hours per client to actually go out and acquire clients. That might be their time constraint. They might be at 1 new client per week. Well, if we do this in a leveraged way, what if we went 3 times per week? What if we assumed that they're going to spend, I have the time cost here of 800, which means they spend 4 hours. So instead of 13 hours to acquire 1 client, the advisor is only spending 12 hours to acquire 3 clients. Well, that's 3 times the ARR, assuming everything else is equal, right? 3 times the annual recurring revenue, 3 times the client base that's being added, right? 3 times the assets under management, and all the increased enterprise value that comes with that, which is typically a multiple on the organic growth is the increase in enterprise value. So we're spending the same amount of money per client. Now, notably, for those of you who are observant here, who are thinking about this, my example here, we're actually spending 3 times as much per week to acquire clients. But as long as we put constraints on our marketing has to achieve certain performance, like it has to, for example, have a marketing efficiency ratio of 1 or better, which is that we have to have at least in our first year, we have to have at least as much new client revenue as we're spending on marketing, right? So if we put the constraints on it, yes, it does mean spending more, but it means you're spending more to get more. And marketing costs are very front loaded, which means that it often costs very little comparatively, almost nothing comparatively to keep that client versus to get them. And so most of your marketing costs for a client, even over the lifetime of communicating with that client, are going to be in the first year. And so what we're doing is we're just stacking ARR. We're stacking ARR. We're stacking ARR by taking the time obligation away from the advisors and putting that budget that we would otherwise spend on them, putting that budget into marketing. Okay. So that's some math to think about. It does get better because Sales Multiply doesn't necessarily require paid advertising. In fact, I have to give some credit here to Patrick DeCesare, who is a YouTube consultant for financial advisors launching their YouTube channels, because he was talking about leverage specifically with launching a YouTube channel. Okay. So there is not a paid advertising expense associated with putting out a YouTube video. You can spend time putting out a YouTube video and you upload it to YouTube. There is a certain cost associated with that time. And there is a certain cost associated with, for example, the microphone, the camera, the editing, and all of that. So there is some cost associated with it, right? But that YouTube video could get viewed by 100 people, 1,000 people, 10,000 people, 100,000 people without you spending additional time or cost, really. In fact, at some point, YouTube could start paying you for all the people who view your video, right? Now that does mean that there's some advertising on your videos, but the point being here that there's very little incremental cost for having that video, or no incremental cost for having that video showed to 100,000 people versus 100 people. And so Sales Multiplied doesn't necessarily require paid advertising, right? And so the amount of money spent on paid advertising may not have to go up nearly as much as the time cost comes down on a per client basis. Okay. I hope that makes sense. So the real time leverage here is that time that you spend packaging your messages in media. The time leverage is, how can we take our message that we're delivering on a consistent basis and getting it in front of our potential clients on a consistent basis? How can we take that message and put it into some forms of media, lots of different forms of media, and then have that media go out in a way where it can be seen by a large number of people? And then the distribution of that media can include things like paid advertising, right? Putting a video on Facebook as a post is different than putting a video on Facebook as an advertisement. You have a lot more control. It costs money, but you have a lot more control over who sees that and how much it gets seen, how widely it gets distributed, if you're willing to pay for it, right? So paid advertising is a way that you can continue to multiply the exposure to that media. Content marketing, it's something where when you're putting out the content, right, that it's just a different way that we are getting that media out into the world. Database marketing is just something you should be doing, period, right? But when you think about database marketing, it's how can we just consistently be putting these messages out to prospects who have not become clients yet, right? And that is a huge form of leverage. And the bigger you grow your database, the more people you get to raise their hand and say, yeah, I'd like more information from you. Here's my email address, right? The more people that you can get to do that, the more leverage every single message that you're putting out has, right? And so there's lots of different ways where we can maybe bring down the paid advertising cost, paid media cost for putting a message out to the marketplace, right? While at the same time, still doing this time leverage, right? By putting our message into media. And here's a quick warning here. if you're going to commit to this, it will probably feel like one step back and two steps forward, which I think is why most people don't do it. Why most financial advisors, why most RIAs barely spend any money or time or effort in trying to acquire new clients. Because here's the thing, like, people make mistakes with marketing. People assume they know what's going to drive response. People have their own internal biases of what they think people should care about and should respond to versus what people actually respond to. People don't know how to generate response from marketing, even if they've seen marketing their entire lives, even if they've been a good salesperson, even if they think they know. The market can very quickly prove you wrong when you think you know. Market still proves me wrong sometimes when I think I know what's going to generate response. So it can feel like one step back as you're starting this out. And it can feel like, oh God, we're spending a bunch of money and we're not getting the results yet. Now, this can be shortcutted by learning from people who've been there, done that, by tapping into expertise and experience of the people who are able to provide that expertise and experience, right? You can shortcut the process. There are proven principles, proven frameworks, proven formulas that work for generating leads for financial advisors, for generating response, for getting people to raise their hand and say, hey, I would love to speak to an advisor about how you could help me with my financial situation, with my retirement planning, and so on, right? So it can feel like one step back to take two steps forward because it's a learning process and you have to find what works. Again, there can be shortcuts. It might feel like a half step back to take two steps forward. Probably if you haven't done it before, there's going to be some like backwards movement initially as you're starting this learning process, trying to figure out what you can try, what doesn't work, what does work, and how you can do more of what works and avoid what doesn't work in the future. But I will say that whether you're doing database marketing or paid advertising or content marketing, success can really start to snowball because the more that you find out what hasn't worked and what has worked, what does work, and what you can repeat, what you can learn from what works and what you can do more of because it works, when you do tests and you get a certain result, and then maybe you run a second test that proves the result was not a fluke, and then you can start to invest more and more in that and start to scale that up, it snowballs. Or like, for example, with YouTube, with podcasts, it is often a slow process in the beginning to start to get an audience for that. It can feel like you're spending months and months where you're getting very little traction with it, where the view counts are like, in the triple digits, which is not very big for view counts. Get a couple dozen views here, get a couple hundred views there. And then you start to get more and more traction because the algorithms that give people content that they may find valuable, those algorithms start to pick you up and start to identify this content is valuable to this audience. So we're going to keep showing it to them. And there's going to be a success snowball that comes with that as well. So as part of this learning process, like I said, it can feel like one step back to take two steps forward. And I think that's why most don't do that, right? You come to this not trying to be a marketer. You come to this trying to be a financial advisor. And you're like, okay, but why do I have to do all this marketing, right? I come to it being a marketer and enjoying the marketing part of it. But I understand that that's, for me, I don't necessarily want to be a financial advisor, even as I learn more and more about the business, right? But as you do this more and more, success can snowball, whether it is getting better at paid advertising and figuring out more about what works, or getting better at content marketing and having the algorithms start to pick you up more, or growing your database of people who've given you permission to contact them. And as that database grows, the number of clients that you can get from every message that you send out also has the potential to grow. Okay. So my warning is that it's not necessarily going to be easy in the beginning It's not going to automatically, instantly feel like you have some massive leverage that you've tapped into because you commit to this idea of we're going to try and make marketing do more of the job of what an advisor is spending their time on in prospecting and lead generation and client acquisition, right? It's not going to instantly feel like it's some ultra powerful, a tool that's instantly making your business more successful. But when you really do commit to this, it can completely transform your business and stimulate a ton of organic growth. In wrapping up this episode, don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, do all the things that help the algorithms of the internet know that you want more content like this and that other people like you might find it valuable. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm at Roy Furr. That's ROYFURR, at Roy Furr, or search for The Advisor CMO. And that desirable discovery calls training that I mentioned earlier is at TheAdvisorCMO.com/discovery. That's TheAdvisorCMO.com/discovery. The link is in the description. I'm Roy Furr, the Advisor CMO. This is the Daily Discovery Calls for Financial Advisors podcast, the first and only podcast dedicated exclusively to helping you as a financial advisor or RIA owner put more discovery calls on your calendar, on your advisor's calendar every single day of the week. I look forward to seeing you again in the next episode. Thanks for tuning into this episode of Daily Discovery Calls for Financial Advisors. If you got value from this episode, I'd absolutely love it if you do me the favor of sharing it with one other person who you think would also find it valuable. It's how the show can grow and how I can keep bringing this value to you. And if you want to learn more about how you can book more discovery calls with your ideal clients, go to theadvisorcmo.com/podcast.